Hi, my name is Johan Brichau, so I just thought I put up a small slide about who I am, very short bullet points. First, I've been doing Smalltalk since 1999, basically after graduating from university. Did 10 years at university using Smalltalk for research projects on software engineering. So I did my PhD there, and after finishing the PhD, you're always looking what will I do next, and for me, it was more interesting to do some business with Smalltalk. So I got the opportunity there 15 years ago. Started YesPlan, of which I will talk actually on Friday, which is a SaaS application for event venue management. So with Seaside, but apart from that, YesPlan is the largest company that I was involved with. But there's also Orderflow, which is more local application using same technology in Belgium, and there's also No Risk, but that was not a commercial success, for example. And I'm also then, since we're using Seaside, I'm now also taking care of the Seaside project since many years. And yeah, this is my first Smalltalks conference, and thank you, Fast, for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here. I hope, I hope this will be one of the many to come, right? So definitely looking forward to that. So I will first be talking about what I call these modern web application architectures with Seaside, right? So what do I mean? Well, I don't know. I guess lots of people know Seaside, but let me ask the question: Who knows Seaside? So raise your hand. Okay, so most of the people. So I will really be very, very brief about that. But yeah, we know that Seaside is, for me, the server-side web framework for Smalltalk. And it is one of the primary characteristics of Seaside is that you can encode the control flow or the flow of a person going through your application as a natural flow, mapping this onto calls like procedure calls. It's component calls, returning from those component calls. So people moving from one page to another page, mapping this more naturally onto the concept of calls in your code. Very important in Seaside is, of course, that everything in your page are built as a composition of reusable components, or intent, or you can reuse your components, of course. Another thing which is there is, of course, we do programmatic HTML generation. There's a jQuery integration, which is heavily used, as I will be showing. And yeah, so we have 3 major supported platforms: Vast, Faro, and Gemstone. So, okay. So what was Seaside originally developed for is what I would say the classic multi-page architecture. We built applications which are static web pages, not static web pages, they're pages, and your user goes through an application by clicking on a link, going to a next page, and clicking is happening. But you're basically generating an HTML and guiding your user. An application is built of interconnected web was I don't know if some shouting in the in the microphone. I have a tendency to. But this is for me, it's a simple architecture. It's easy to implement. It's all the logic is on the server, and that's the advantage. Me as a coder, it's more easy to develop this application. But for a user, this page navigation. Modern web applications, that's not the thing you want, and I will be doing it a little bit later. So if people don't page web applications, or away from this server-side rendering and server-side generated web pages, so you won't be using Seaside basically. Your server will be an API, REST API serving JSON, and you will be implementing your entire application using something that runs in your browser, modern web frameworks, React, Vue, many others. But this is a disadvantage there, is that often the times you're dividing your application between client and server, and also different languages. So you will be replicating and dividing your application logic between two different parts. But the advantage dynamic and partial page updates, you have more like an application running in your browser. And most of the time, of course, you can use Seaside in this context, but you will only be using the application. So you won't be using like the the things that Seaside is known for. And that's a stateless server API, which is coming back later. So I would say, well, I want to go not the entirely this direction and drop Seaside and just use the REST framework for which you don't really need Seaside. But my argument here is to say, well, we can do hybrid web architectures and combine actually best of both worlds. Still have Seaside producing the HTML from the server, so completely server-side rendering. So entire application logic in Seaside. And then you can find some client-side components which you want to use and you don't want to re-implement, and they need to run in the browser. For example, a data that's easier that you just use a component and you use this in part of your web page instead of having always the client-server round trip when you would click on one next date to use. You don't want that. But we do want a single-page experience with a multi-page architecture. So that's basically what I want to demonstrate here. So that's very short. I will now elaborate the argument. But for me, this multi-page or hybrid architecture, it's what you can call the server-side rendered single-page applications, and them with Seaside. And we will be using different technologies there. I mean, using for more than 15 years in this context. But I will actually be showing how to acquire reestablishing normal control flow or the advantages you have of Seaside, because jQuery scripts, and I've been doing a lot of them over the past 15 years, in the easy examples, they look nice. They will show nice in these easy examples. But if you have a lot of them, it becomes really tedious and complex to maintain. While maybe going to Hotwire will actually be a lot easier. So I have two example web applications I will show you, and we will gradually introduce all these techniques in there to see how that looks like. So I have a beach shop, attractive one, but okay, this is a web shop, right? So web shop stuff to buy, and I want to browse through the different different tools on my. I have to reset. Yeah, and then good. I have different articles to buy. There's a website here. I can start going through my things here, and this is built using traditional Seaside. So full page navigation. You will see things you don't want to have when you're using a web shop, but that's part of the argument, right? I have the list of all my articles here, and I will say, okay, I will buy this mat. I click it, and of course, this is full page navigation, so the thing jumps to another page, and I'm back at the top. So I'm scrolling back to the top. Not really nice, but that was the easy thing to implement in Seaside, and then I can add it to the cart. Of course, again, jump to the top, but then I have my cart here updated. And this is, of course, full page navigation, the easy way to implement something in Seaside, but not the way you really want it to behave, of course. Same thing here. I have a search function, and every time I type, I would actually go to a new page. Definitely not the thing you want to be seeing, but it does work. If I'm searching for a tent, I will actually filter for a tent. So that's an easy way to implement this. Another example is the to-do application here. I mean, same thing. I have complete site, basic things, in-place editing. I'll just change this here, or changing it. And it's not really visible because the page doesn't have a scrolling, but this is full page updates all the time again, so you will have the same disadvantages. So that's using me as the very simple way to implement this. And we know this is a composition of components. So I have my web shop application, and inside of my web shop category list component, I have this method to render the buy action, which is the one when I click on the basket in the list of items. So this is using the traditional Seaside. I'm having a callback, and well, there's a self show there. I could also use self call, but basically more or less the same in this example. But then I'm jumping to replacing it with another component. So I call out and I click on my buy button. I will replace my listing component with the single component where I can update the number and then finally put it in my basket. So add it to my cart. That's the way we implement this in Seaside. I'm jumping to this other subroutine, the part of the page, and then I will actually answer when I say, well, I have it now, I want it, I'm adding it to my cart. And that's an easy way to implement it, but of course the result is that you see that you have full page navigation in Seaside, and for this web shop, it's not the thing you would want to have. Same thing for the searching. This would be the code for searching, and it's a simple form. And just a little bit of JavaScript there is just that on every input you would trigger the form submission, which means that you generate exactly the new page, and you filter using that search term when you're showing your products. And that's a simple implementation. So that's the idea. I want to actually have this simple implementation, but not have the disadvantages of full page navigation using traditional Seaside. So how do I fix this? Well, we've been doing this for more than 15 years. We would be saying, well, we use jQuery in Seaside. We have the jQuery and a very nice jQuery integration. So instead of using full page re-rendering, I will introduce a couple of scripts there, which will only do partial AJAX updates of my page, of course. So that's what we will be doing. And actually, in this example, it looks really, really simple, because I just have to, for the search, for example, I just have to replace, and can't show but you have the on input element there. Instead of just doing the form submission, well, you will actually trigger the serialization of the form and just only update the part of the page where the list of components is shown. The list of web shop items is shown. So that actually is not too difficult, and it looks like really easy to do this with jQuery. So I have, for example, here in the to-do list. You can do this in jQuery, but the web shop, but I'll just jump to the to-do list here. For example, I have a really large to-do list in this case, right? So if you would do full page re-rendering of this one, it also will take a lot of time and have a very bad performance. So that's actually the reason why you often will go to partial page updates. And this is the to-do application implemented with jQuery. And you have a callback for every item would also be very slow. So you have more complexities introducing this jQuery. But I do have, on double click, I can edit one, I can do this one, and this is actually using jQuery. But this becomes complicated. This becomes tedious in the end to maintain, because this is the example how you should introduce the jQuery element to do the in-place editing of a to-do item. You can do it more simple, but that would mean you have to generate a callback for every to-do item, and that will never, it goes very, very slow. So you have to, I will not try to explain it, but it's tedious to maintain, and you have many different scripts coming all over the place. In the end, it becomes too difficult to follow. So what we'll be proposing as a solution is using Hotwire. So there, we try to maintain the natural code flow. So I try to implement my application using the natural flow, the natural way of implementing this in Seaside, but we do not have full page re-rendering, and we do still have the partial page updates being taken care of by the Hotwire framework. So what is Hotwire? It is a client-side framework which will augment your server-side rendered pages. You actually just need to add attributes to your HTML markup, and this client-side library will interpret them and do something with it. And what it does, or what we'll be using, is of course to implement the single page behavior. It actually comes from the Ruby on Rails community, so they also have server-side rendered applications, and normally this would also be full page re-rendering, and then they introduced this framework. But it's agnostic to what you use on the backend, so you can use it with any backend framework. So we integrated this with Seaside, and the part we will be showing is the turbo part, because if you go take a look at the Hotwired website, you will see that's turbo and there's stimulus. And stimulus is basically allowing you to add additional behavior in execution in the browser, while turbo is the one which you integrate with your backend framework. So how does this actually work? So I will just first show it, show how it works. So I have my shop application here again. I have this menu where I will turn on Hotwired. I have to make it. But now I'm actually back to implementing it in exactly the same way as before, so no jQuery. And I have my application. I can push the buy button here, and only this part was actually being updated when I clicked on it. Same thing when I do the add to cart. As you noticed, I didn't scroll, so that's the way you see it, of course, in this small application. I updated this part and I jumped back to my list here. And this implementation, switching back here, this implementation actually uses the same way of implementing it as with traditional Seaside, or almost the same. You will see. So if I have my webshop application here, I have my shopping cart component, which was on the top, and I also have my category list, which lists all the possible items to buy from my shop. What I need to identify in my application is the parts of my page that I want to have updated, so you can identify, and that's what they call turbo frames. And in Seaside, what we did is you just use a decorator to decorate your existing components. You wrap them in a decorator, a turbo frame decorator, and that means Seaside knows this part of the web page will actually have to be only this part will need to be updated if you will execute an action from within this component. That's the standard behavior. So what it looks like to the Hotwire library running in the client is that the HTML produced by this component is just wrapped inside of a turbo frame. So inside of the turbo frame HTML markup. And whenever you have a link inside of that, it will make the request to the Seaside, to your server, and only update that part when it returns inside of the turbo frame. So that means that turbo frames are just these independent pieces of your application which need to be updated, which you previously would do with a jQuery and doing this manually in your scripts. But while it would work having a full page rendering on the server, Seaside is optimized to actually only re-render the part inside of the turbo frame. So you have the advantage of the performance advantage of only rendering that specific part. Because Hotwire can say, well, I'm just sending the request back to the server. It gets the full page back, and it will actually extract this turbo frame again and only update that part on the page. But you optimize it Seaside to only return the turbo frame. So it will walk the component tree and only re-render that. And that's, of course, important. Otherwise, you will do needless stuff back on the server. And this is the default behavior. Whenever I click inside, so this is actually wrapped in a turbo frame. Whenever I click here, it will only update that part of my application. But there's others. Wait, I have maybe I guess first. When you put animations on your slides, you should go ahead. Anyway, so this is the implementation using Hotwire, right? And it looks exactly the same. The only thing is, instead of using call or show, I use turbo call and turbo show, which basically is the same thing. It just means that where the component you instantiate and you pass to turbo call or turbo show, it will automatically wrap it inside of a decorator. So it will automatically decorate it with a turbo frame decorator. But you see, actually, the flow is completely the same. I don't have to implement. In the simple examples I show here, these are easy jQueries you would replace it with, but often, and all the applications I've written, they become quite complex and tedious. So here, it's actually exactly the same thing as writing a traditional or classic Seaside application. But we have these single application with partial page updates. Now, there's, of course, these cases, the example, the base one, that when you execute an action from within a turbo frame, it will only update that turbo frame, but that's not enough, right? You often want to update different parts of your page. And that's where turbo stream callbacks come in. When I clicked on here, yep. When I click on add to cart, I don't only need to update this part of the page back to show the list, but I also need to update my cart, right? And instead of reverting them to a full page update, you will do an update of different turbo frames on your page. And that's done with a turbo stream callback, which allows you to replace, remove, append, prepend pieces on your web page, just like you also have these, well, not primitives, but functions with jQuery, right? So you would just add them in the same way. Only here, it's done completely declaratively. So what happens in going from my single product show when I click on the add to cart. So this is piece of code that is done when you click on the add to my shopping cart. It will replace, on answering, it will replace it again with the component that called it, so my web shop category list. But it will also replace the cart which is in the navigation menu. And so instead of writing a simple callback, you have this TurboStream callback, which gives you an argument where you can push all these changes to. And in this case, for example, I'm saying, and I have to pass an identifier in this case, an ID of my web page, but replace the navigation menu with rendering the menu again. So then you can identify all the pieces you want to update on your web page, and you can stream it to your client, to your browser. Here's another example of using, and this is in the to-do application. So when I go to the to-do application with Turbo, this is exactly the same. So using Turbo with exactly the same implementation as traditional Seaside, but it has partial page updates. To do one, I do so it's difficult to see here, but everything, all the functionality works. You have in-place editing, and for example, the destroyer here is, of course, there you need to just replace the component. If I destroy this component, I replace it with something else. Maybe the hack would be to replace it with an empty turbo frame, but the cleaner and nicer ways to say to Seaside, well, actually, I'm removing this component from my my rendering tree. How much time do I have left? Oh, I have no time left. All right. I have 5 minutes. All right, that's exactly what I need. Thank you, Hernan. So that's the, and here I'm doing the TurboStream callback. I'm removing the component. That's the part about Hotwired, but I also use a lot of some parts where we say, well, I don't want to do server-side rendering. It doesn't make sense. I have this entire library of things I can find on the web, and okay, it's written in JavaScript, but it's exactly what I need. For example, a date picker I gave as an example. You don't want to re-implement a date picker. You just want to use the date picker. I've been using the date picker from jQuery UI and afterwards Airbnb, just integrating it. Another example I have in the web shop here is that, okay, I went to this library of React components, and instead of listing all the things to buy just in a large list on my web page, I wanted this carousel. If it wants to work, probably it doesn't. Maybe it's broken because I don't have, okay, but this is I'll show it in the, so this component I found in this React components, and it's showing me very dynamically how the web shop is organized, and I'll show it here. It's going to be easier. So I can activate it here in my, I'll refresh just to make sure. Yeah, so I don't have any demo. But this is then, instead of showing me the entire website, well, as a long list on the page, it's more dynamically, and I can click on this, and I don't have to implement anything because there's a React component doing that for me. How do I integrate this with Seaside? Well, in this case, you will have to call and instantiate the React component and pass a JSON to that React component, but making it part of your server-side rendering application. So I really don't serve round trip, and I want to reuse these components. So for example, how this works, of course, I'm just rendering, instead of rendering, you're rendering a script where you call out the instantiation of this React component, and you pass it a configuration in JSON. And you have all the elements in Seaside to do so. So I think many people doing lots of Seaside, I see, Gabriel, look, this is normal. This is what you need to do. So I just wanted to show that. That's what it looks like, right? You just create a dictionary, which would be the JSON configuration onto the React component, has everything you need, and you just instantiate, or you create a script where you create this carousel in this case. Now, the thing that many people then don't see is that you can just pass an URL for a block for a callback, because that's what I need to do. I need to pass to this carousel exactly the URL to go and send back to Seaside when I click inside of my carousel on the element which I clicked on, because the generation of the HTML happens in React on the browser. I don't have any control, but I can pass it arguments. The React component needs to have this possibility, of course, otherwise you're not possible to do, but I can pass this URL, and I can just grab a URL, and for a callback. So in this case, the show the single product item. This is something I pass on in a JSON dictionary, and it will be used in the generation of the HTML now, like this. All right. So one final thing I would say, Seaside is a stateful framework, and actually the advantages of Seaside is very much to do with being completely stateful, setting your components. Also, Hotwired relies on being stateful because it needs to know which components are there. There's quite some requests or quite some views on, okay, how can I go stateless? Because many times I write pieces of my web page which I don't require state, and I want to scale more horizontally. For example, the web shop, I want to really go towards many users and be very rich selling lots of beach items. But in that case, I will need to scale horizontally, and that having a state on your server makes it more difficult because you need to have the requests going to your server where the state is maintained, right? Instead of having to reconstruct it all the time. So just as an initial idea, I implemented actually exactly the same, or the possibility in Seaside is you can, of course, use the Seaside REST framework not to generate JSON, but just generate HTML. And you have to implement it a little bit yourself, but it's actually quite easy. So you can easily generate this entire same component because it's the same component. I just leave out the generation or doing callbacks, of course, but this is the same component. I have a stateless web application. People can see my web app, and I don't create any session. But at some point, you might want to start creating a session. And so the ability to create and start a session here is that when the person starts the buy button, you say, well, I initiate a session, and from that point on, you actually start going stateful. So also these things, but it's not quite elaborated yet in Seaside. So there's maybe some more support we want to introduce there. So just as a wrap up, as my 5 minutes are now completely depleted. So I just showed you a couple of things on how to use Seaside in a more modern web architecture context, and that means single web page application behavior. Normally, Seaside is for multi-page classic, going through different stages in your website. But using jQuery, we already did lots of things to do partial page updates. But for me, this becomes tedious. So Hotwire as a solution there. Or if you don't want to use, or you don't want to have a client server round trip, you can integrate many of the existing components, whether it would be React or anything else inside of your application. And then, yeah, stateless, you can do Seaside REST. So there's more things to elaborate there on the stateless part. But yeah, as a Seaside REST framework, we already have pieces of the puzzle lying around. That's what I wanted to tell you. So thank you for listening. Any questions?
The button to add to cart, and it would insert to the cart. And what sort of facilities do you have to secure that? For example, if you had a purchase limit on a particular product and you tried to protect it from adding more at 5 to cart, and they did that, I mean, you could technically edit the page to, circumvent that in some way.
Well, I would say in this case, it's actually easier because the entire logic is completely on the server, so and I remain there. And while you will always, even if you go, if you would be using jQuery or anything else, or you would do using a REST API, you would need to validate. You would need to validate on your server whether, I mean, you can buy 5 items or you can buy more or less. But the thing is that if you separate the logic, and that's the thing, what we needed to do, for example, is you also need to have a nice customer or a client or a user experience in saying, well, you cannot buy more than 5. And that often ends up writing behavior in your web browser itself. But you will always need to validate what happens on your server. So when you come in with the argument saying, I want to buy 5, there's no 5, you cannot, well, then you cannot.
Well, I use that as an example.
Sorry? Yeah, of course. No. It actually falls back to the same security mechanisms you have in Seaside for protection against cross-site scripting and everything else. So, and that's standard in Seaside because we do programmatic HTML generation. And whenever you would have something coming in, it will always escape it by standard. So we actually fall back to the existing security mechanisms and not complicate it even more. That's what
Okay, thank you.
It is.
I wanted to ask about the Hotwire. Is something that already existed. It's something that you are implementing. I'm not sure if the wrappers you showed were something that you programmed on top of an existing framework, or if you're maintaining Hotwire, or the, which parts of the code, or something that's, I don't know, a Smalltalk project that we could download and try, and what, or if you're just showing what you're using internally.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the question. The Hotwire is made by the Ruby on Rails community. It's part of it's there also the same solution to having partial page updates and more single page application behavior inside of a Ruby application. But the Hotwire is the JavaScript library you need to load in your web browser, and that will interpret all the attributes you put on the generated HTML it gets from the server. So it's server-side agnostic. What I did is implement the integration with Seaside. In first integration is easy. You just have to add all the possible attributes to drive Hotwire. But then mapping the call and show and the answer mechanism onto this action of clicking a link inside of a component. That's then the integration of that in Seaside. So it's you can just download it, part of Seaside. If you would install it right now, you would have to install the packages as an addition because it's in a preview phase. I'm still allowing myself to change lots of the API. But the example of the to-do application, for example, is in there. You can take a look at how it's implemented. I will also probably add the Beach Shop application when I clean up my code a little bit more to show it as a demonstrator. So the integration of the Hotwired framework with Seaside is the thing I'm adding. Hotwired is something which comes from the Ruby on Rails community.
Thanks.
You mentioned that you need Seaside applications to be stateful in order to have Hotwire.
For now, yeah.
Yeah, why is that?
Oh, it's just because I mapped the call and answer mechanism onto the fact of doing TurboFrame updates. And I mean, that basically means you need to have the component state there. Yeah, so I mean, the Hotwired itself, because it's built with Ruby on Rails, which is stateless. So it's not in a conceptual conflict. It's just that me integrating it into Seaside, integrating it with the core features of Seaside means you integrate it with the stateful features at the moment. Yep.
Okay, thanks. I think we're done.
All right, thank you very much.